We're on our fourth week, I believe, of this series. Is that correct? So our first week we looked at the definitions of genocide and the Holocaust, so that we're all talking about the same thing. Second session, we looked at a brief history of anti-Semitism and how it's existed specifically within the last 2,000 years. Last we looked at the rise of Nazi Germany. How did Hitler and the Nazi Party come into power in the first place? How is that possible? And we looked at a lot of those factors that went into it. Everything from the Franco-Prussian War to World War I to the Treaty of Versailles to financial instability, a population looking for a reason to believe in themselves again, etc., till finally he was not elected. President Paul von Hindenburg was elected, but Hitler was selected, chosen, asked to be chancellor. And that is where we're going to pick back up. 1933, so January 30th, 1933, Hitler is appointed chancellor in this brand new term of the 7-year term under President Paul von Hindenburg. These years from 1933 to 1938 or through 1938 into 39 are often described as the years of persecution. If you're looking for two very good, just staple, comprehensive resources or books, there are two books by Saul Friedlander called Nazi Germany and the Jews Part 1, Persecution, Nazi Germany and the Jews Part 2, Extermination. So if you're looking for resources, those are like the big meaty ones. But it's where we get this term, the years of persecution, 33 to 38. But before we dive into that, I want you to look around, try to find others that you can discuss with. If you see someone by themselves, invite them over to your group. We're just going to take a couple of minutes, and I'm going to put up a loaded question. And I'll just tell you from the beginning, it's a loaded question, right? So, and it's probably a question that Dr. Kite here would be better to instruct, but I'm going to do it nonetheless because it plays into what we're going to look at tonight. What makes something right or wrong when it comes to our societies, states, and nations? How do we determine something is right or something is wrong when it comes to our societies, states, and nations? I want you to think about some of the answers you gave, maybe some of the answers that you heard your group give. I'm sure there's a lot of different ones. I wasn't necessarily looking for a right or wrong answer, even though the question was, what is right and wrong? When I've taught this in the past, and I've asked individuals of all different ages, whether it was middle school, high school, college, adult classes, there's a lot of different answers that are given. One that is often given quite a bit, especially when you emphasize our society, states, and nations, are laws. What's right and wrong is you can't break the law. You can't go against the Constitution. You can't go against the restrictions that our elected officials put into place. That is what decides what's right and wrong for us as a society. And what we are going to look at tonight is going to challenge that. Boo. All right, 1933 to 1938 were called the years of persecution. Between 33 and 39, because we go right up to World War II, the German government at all levels adopted hundreds, roughly up to 400, laws, decrees, directive guidelines, and regulations aimed at restricting the civil and human rights of Jews in Germany. Roughly 400 rules, laws, restrictions, and regulations. Hitler wanted a German Reich, or empire, that was free of Jews. Anti-Jewish legislation was the first step in that direction. If you remember in our first week, we were introduced to this concept called the Jewish question. The Jewish question was this concept or issue that people had been questioning for hundreds of years, which is, what is the place of the Jewish people in our societies? It's rooted in an anti-Semitic principle that they don't just have a place like everyone else. But the question is, what place do they have in our societies? What do we do with the Jews? And so different countries at different times have tried to answer that question. Nazi Germany wasn't the first. And their initial answer to that question was not mass murder. That wasn't the original idea That's why we call it the quote-unquote final solution to the Jewish question. Christopher Browning, who is an esteemed Holocaust educator, puts this progression of persecution towards the Jewish people into 3 steps. The first one is emigration. Who can give me an idea of what emigration means? Leaving, right? If immigration is people coming into your country, emigration is people leaving your country. In the first week, I said that you could boil down much of what Hitler and Nazi Germany wanted into 2 goals. Does anyone remember what those 2 goals were? Or one of the 2 goals? More land, yes. And a pure racial population, or preferred racial population. So, more living space, the Lebensraum, and they wanted to be Judenfrei, or free of Jews, or other undesirable people groups. So the first answer to this Jewish question was emigration. Passed hundreds of anti-Jewish laws and restrictions, and Jews were not the only ones who had laws passed against them, but this is the Holocaust class, so that it becomes so unbearable in a way for them to live there that they leave on their own. That is the initial idea. And the first 2 laws that we're going to look at that happened in 1933 are going to set the stage for the rest of the Nazi regime. And, if I can be so bold, these first 2 decrees make almost everything that Hitler and the Nazis do legal. February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building, kind of their parliament or their Capitol Hill, if you will, is set on fire in Berlin. There are still debates about how that fire started today, but the propaganda was placed on communists within Germany for who started that fire. Now, the 2 groups that they blame the most for losing World War I were, anyone? Communists and the Jews, right? So political opponents as well. So February 27th, there's a Reichstag fire. The very next day, there is the decree for the protection of people and the Reich. Our undergraduate Holocaust class here at Viterbo, we looked at this over the last couple weeks. We actually spent an entire lecture just looking at these 2 decrees that we're going to look at. And we wrestled with them, and I told them, this is me, but I would be cautious of any law that's passed specifically for your protection. That's just me, right? Automatically, I'm asking myself, what are you protecting me from? What is the thing that I'm in danger of? But that was the Reichstag fire decree. It was called the Decree for the Protection of the People in the Reich, passed 1 day after the Reichstag fire, and it gave permission to arrest and incarcerate political opponents without specific charge or due process. It dissolved political organizations, suppressed publications, and the central government authority was able to overrule state and local laws and governments. All in the name of protecting against the communist or political threats around us. So in other words, you could be arrested, incarcerated indefinitely, without any due process, without trial, solely at the mercy of whenever they decided that they wanted to let you go. Now, to add to this, shortly after was the establishment of the first camp that we would call a concentration camp under Nazi Germany called Dachau. Dachau was established March 22nd, 1933, 1 month after the Reichstag fire decree. Pay attention to dates and what's created and established. It was a former munitions factory, and it was primarily for political opponents, not Jews. Political opponents. But Dachau was the first and only camp to exist all the way through the Nazi regime. Other camps would pop up, they would start, they would shut down, they would shift their focus or their purpose. Dachau was the one that consisted all the way through. And most people who went into concentration camps early on were released again. They didn't stay there forever. Anyone want to guess why? Why were they taken, treated terribly, and then released back into the public? Intimidation. Intimidation and fear factor. So let's just imagine this. Imagine you're out to dinner, and your group of friends is sitting amongst a lot of tables of people sitting in a restaurant, and you make what you think is a somewhat innocent anti-government joke. Some slight on the official, whether it was a president or a senator or congressman, whatever, you make some slight, a joke, an insult against them. Well, your table is laughing. 2 tables over isn't. 2 tables over goes outside and reports, so-and-so has made a comment about the government. I think they are communists. I think they're anti-government. I think they stand for something other than us. All of a sudden, when you leave that night, your friend doesn't make it home. And you don't see them for weeks, maybe months. And then, out of nowhere, they pop back up again. A bit worn, lost weight, maybe bruised, and you're out to dinner again. Someone makes a joke. What's the first thing that person's going to say? Shut up. Stop it. Don't say anything. Trust me. Just be quiet. You have no idea. That happens enough times. They don't have to necessarily arrest you anymore. You're going to be told not to do it from people that you trust because they were arrested. So the Reichstag fire decree gave the Nazi government, or in all reality, the German government at that time, the ability to arrest without due process and incarcerate without due process. And the Dachau concentration camp was created. Now, shortly after that, 1 month later, March 24th, 1933, the law to remedy the distress of the people and the Reich. It sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds good. Gave Hitler the ability to enact laws without the approval of the parliament or President von Hindenburg. How in the world would something like that pass? Right? I mean, sure, he had 240 seats in the Reichstag that were Nazi members, but how would something like that pass? Well, what was just passed the month before was the Reichstag fire decree, which was against any political opponents. So, the members of the Reichstag, who were communist or sympathizers to other governments, many of them were rounded up and detained for the time of the vote. The only people left were the ones that could vote in favor of the Enabling Act. Now imagine the power that you have. I can pass any law that I want, and I can incarcerate anyone that I want. Do you see how these 2 laws make much of what happens from here on out legal? The Reichstag fire decree and the Enabling Act. April 1st, 1933 was the first public boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. Here on the left, you have Joseph Goebbels, who was their common tongue. We call him the Minister of Propaganda. Here are some signs of individuals, right, standing outside of a Jewish-owned store. What's interesting about this picture, and what's often brought up when we studied this picture, because it's a fairly well-known picture, is that it's divided linguistically. The top, you have your German, and the bottom, you have English. And a lot of scholars and individuals have tried to interpret this. Was it just because English was somewhat of a neutral tongue? Maybe, but maybe not so much back in 1930s. Or was it a statement? For all the other international countries, for those in the West to know, this is what we are deciding to do. And we call others to do it as well. A boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. The reality is that it didn't last that long, and it wasn't that successful. But it was setting a precedent. We can do this. We can do this and tell our public to do it as well. It was the first visible, recognizable idea and exercise against the Jewish people that we don't have to necessarily respect them or their property. Now, we're only 3 months into 1933. I can make whatever law I want. I can incarcerate anyone that I want without due process. We can make a public spectacle of boycotting Jewish-owned businesses, and now the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. April 7, 1933, the law excludes Jews and political opponents from all civil service positions, also aimed at attacking the civil rights of Jews. We're going to see quite a few of these anti-Jewish, not 400, but quite a few of these anti-Jewish laws that were passed in 1933. April again, 25th, 1933. The law against overcrowding in schools and universities. It's just getting too crowded. See how the way that you can shadow this, the way that you can twist the words to make it sound good? It's just, we're too crowded. So, what do we have to do? We have to limit how many Jews can come to the school. No other ramification, no other demographic. It's Jews who have to be limited from the school. So no public school can have more than 5% of the total student population to be Jewish. Public schools began to play an important role in spreading Nazi ideology. Start in education. Start in the schools. Teach them what's normal. And then wait. Raise it, train it, indoctrinate it, and then wait. April 26, 1933, a new group is formed called the Gestapo. The Gestapo begins functioning as a state-sponsored organization under the initial command of Hermann Goering. It was the secret police of the Nazi state. So they were able to operate pretty much without much restriction, and they were often used in the place of interrogations, getting information. You didn't want the Gestapo knocking on your door. May 10th, 1933 was a book burning. Now, a lot of times when we think of book burnings, we think of organizations or maybe administrations or groups in them of themselves who are telling us what books we cannot read. This was the opposite of that. This was actually student-led, student-initiated. A public demonstration of allegiance to Nazi ideology by students by burning books that represented opposition to their cause. Authors like Karl Marx, Ernest Hemingway, Jack London, Helen Keller. Authors that they thought opposed either their political ideologies, opposed their social norms or standards, who didn't live up to their purity of race and biology. Upwards of 25,000 volumes of books were burned. Again, not required or mandated, done on their own accord. July 14th, 1933, we're only 6 months into the first year of Nazi rule. And they passed the law for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases. Yes, they wanted a racially pure population, but that wasn't just ethnicities or religions such as Poles, Jews, or the Roma or Sintis, the derogatory term being gypsies. It wasn't just that. They wanted biologically pure. If you go back to this idea of eugenics, they wanted to get rid of bad genes and only continue to further positive genes that made their racial pool stronger. Well, a problem with that is that they saw that there are these, what they would call socially unacceptable or biologically unacceptable traits that they wanted to remove from their gene pool by making sure that those individuals could not have offspring. So July 14th, 1933, the law mandated the forced sterilization of individuals with certain mental and physical disabilities. It set a precedent. I mean, we talked about how other countries were involved in the eugenics idea. A lot of them were based on a philosophy and ideology. Nazi Germany just simply took it to its next natural step of practical implication. So it set the foundation for future sterilizations and clandestine killing projects of individuals with illnesses, disabilities, or undesirable traits, social and ethnic. Here's a list of 9 conditions that were highlighted at first for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases: schizophrenia, manic depressive disorder, genetic epilepsy, Huntington's, genetic blindness, deafness, severe physical deformity, chronic alcoholism, feeble-mindedness. Out of curiosity, does anyone here know anyone or has known anyone in their life with any of those? Yeah? How many of you are thinking about feeble-mindedness? How many of you can tell me what that actual physical diagnosis is? Anyone?
Someone who doesn't think like me.
Someone who's forgetful? Someone who has a hard time keeping their train of thought? It's not an actual physical, it's not a disease, feeble-mindedness is not a thing, strictly speaking. We might think we feel feeble-minded sometimes, but it's not a thing, strictly speaking. Chronic alcoholism. Now, we might say, some people identify what alcoholism runs in my family, or I see it generationally, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to automatically pass down from generation to generation without any sort of intervention. But this was the way that they looked at it. We can just make sure that those individuals do not have offspring. So we forcibly sterilize them so to make sure of it. And instead, we will double up on efforts or encourage efforts to populate what we think are the positive physical traits. July 14th, 1933, the Nazi Party is declared the only political party. July. He was asked to be in power in January. Now in July, it's the only political party. July 20th, 1933, was an agreement called the Vatican Concordat. And the Vatican Concordat was an agreement that limited the authority of the Catholic Church, at least within the parameters of German-occupied territory. We won't meddle in your business, you don't meddle in our business. And so Nazi Germany had the Reich approval to appoint positions of authority within the church. It was no longer church appointed. The Nazi government, the Reich, had the ability to appoint their own leaders within the Catholic Church. In many ways, unfortunately, during that time, the church ended up submitting to the strong hand of the government. On October 23rd, 1933, Germany leaves the League of Nations. 60 countries sent delegates to the disarmament conference in February of 1932 to argue for military reductions to avoid another world war. Germany leaves that agreement. Someone asked a scholar, maybe ever been Christopher Browning again, quite a few years ago, what are some of the signs that you look for? Because everyone is trying to figure out, are we living in another Nazi era? Are we living in a Nazi era? Are we living in a Nazi era? And he said this several years ago in basically correlating to this event on October 23rd. And he said one thing that he looks for, he doesn't call everything Nazi, he doesn't call everything, but he said one red flag to be mindful of is multiple acts of intentional isolationism. When your country refuses to partner with other countries in these, whether it's a League of Nations, a United Nations, a NATO, when you have countries who refuse to participate and say, well, we will no longer be under any sort of co-accountability, for him, he was saying that to him as a red flag. The country that refuses co-accountability, that only wants to do what they want to do. Now on June 30th, we're going to fast forward a year, 1934. Has anyone ever heard of the Night of the Long Knives? A couple of you, okay. Here's what happens. If you remember from the Treaty of Versailles, the German army was reduced down to, does anyone remember the number?
100,000.
100,000. You guys are really good students. I'm just going to imagine you didn't know any of this before, right? This is just stuff that you've retained from these classes. So the German army was reduced down to 100,000 people, but they didn't have any strong restrictions on your paramilitary groups. So if you remember when we were talking about these 1932 elections, there were multiple different political parties, and they all had their own little political party paramilitary group. Well, the Nazi parties was called the SAs, or the brown shirts. The German army was restricted to 100,000 people, but within the course of a few years, the brown shirts had gotten up to a number of 2 million. Loopholes. But Hitler knows something. He knows that if he eventually wants to consolidate all power into himself, if and when President von Hindenburg is no longer around, he needs the German military, their actual formal military, behind him if he wants to do everything he wants to do militarily. He needs the formal, organized military behind him. And so there's this struggle now, this ego between the SAs, who are saying they should have more of a presence, they should be utilized more, they should be given as much respect or even replace the military because there's 2 million of them, and the leaders of the military themselves who see them as a threat. To make it worse, the leader of the SAs, Ernst Röhm, he was a war hero. He was one of the first members with Hitler of the Nazi Party. He's one of the few people that history tells us was described as a friend of Hitler's. Not many people were called friends of Hitler. Ernst was. He was also an outspoken homosexual, which does not play well in Hitler's society and culture that he's trying to create. And so, June 30th, 1934, orders were given to the SS to assassinate the leaders of the SA as an act of purging the SA's leadership, the SA's power struggle, and their ego, and as a forward play or a forward move to consolidating the sympathy of the military. Even his own friend was not spared. August 2nd, 1934, President von Hindenburg dies. His funeral procession consisted of 60 miles of blazing torches in honor of the former president and war hero. He was deeply loved by the people. He was respected by the people. He was more of a centralist as far as politics go, which I think spoke to a lot of people. He was a war hero that they respected, but his health had been declining for quite a while. And now it's where we take that big gasp. The one thing standing in the way of Hitler taking absolute power was President Paul von Hindenburg in power. So now, what happens? Less than 3 weeks later, August 19th, 1934, Hitler abolishes the office of president. He makes himself the Führer and supreme leader of Germany. There's now no legal or constitutional limit to Hitler's power, and most of it is legal. The motto was Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one leader. If you remember all the way back to 1920, he gave us a 25-point program of what the Nazi Party wanted to do. One of them was to centralize all authority into one. He's doing it. He also wanted to regain land and bring people back together, and he's going to do that now. After that night of the long knives, it made a statement to the military, and it's a statement that Hitler needed to make to the military. Prior to that, their oath, like many military oaths, were to the people, to the nation, to the Constitution, to the Republic. Now, this is the new military oath of allegiance. I swear by God this holy oath that I will render to Adolf Hitler, Führer of the German Reich, and people, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, unconditional obedience, and that I am ready as a brave soldier to risk my life at any time for this oath. It was no longer to a constitution, a republic, a people, a country. The oath initiated by them not forced, was now to Hitler himself. September 15th, 1935, two laws that are passed that set the stage for a lot of the quote-unquote racial cleansing were the Nuremberg race laws. The Reich citizenship law said that only people of German or kindred blood could be citizens of Germany, no Jews. You lose your citizenship, you lose your privileges of citizenship, your rights of citizenship. You're no longer a citizen. Jewish was no longer a religious affiliation, but was defined as someone with 3 or more grandparents born into the Jewish community. There are several accounts of individuals who found themselves in ghettos or concentration camps, even killing centers, who had no idea that they were what was defined by Germany as Jewish. And the law for the protection of German blood and honor, again, for our protection, banned marriage between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. All sexual relationships between Jews and non-Jewish Germans was considered a criminal act of race defilement. You couldn't be a citizen, and you couldn't marry or have sex solely for the purpose of offspring between non-German and German. Now, Hitler starts to make his moves. He has the military. He can make whatever laws he wants. He can arrest and incarcerate whoever he wants. He is the Führer. He has centralized all power. And now he wants to go get back what they lost in the Treaty of Versailles. So Germany remilitarizes the Rhineland. This is right over here. This darker colored brown right there, the Rhineland. In direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler sends the German army back into the Rhineland. Allies do nothing in response. Much of what was taken, certain areas, the Rhineland included, were areas with rich mineral deposits, where you would have your quarries, your heavy metals, your instruments of creating and building were taken away from them for the purpose that they do not create and build. And Hitler is going back after them. He wants those resources so that he can build again and restore his military again. Now, 1936, Hitler decides to put the show on display. The 1936 Olympics, hosted in Berlin. And he wanted to use it as a spectacle of Nazi greatness. There are some countries who are already trying to discuss whether they should boycott these Olympics because of humanitarian concerns. But nonetheless, it still went on. Hitler saw it as an opportunity to show off the splendor of Germany and the Nazi regime. And he truly believed in the superiority of his German Aryan race. Some of the things that happened there, we actually still continue, like the running of the torch. First time it took place in modern history was Hitler's Olympics. We still do it because it looks good. One athlete that was particularly detestable to Hitler was the American sprinter Jesse Owens. Jesse would go on to win 4 gold medals as a U.S. black athlete, which went against everything Hitler was trying to teach his German population. Hitler refused to shake his hand or acknowledge the win. I was on a flight last week, I think it was, and I saw the movie The Boys in the Boat. Did everyone watch that, The Boys in the Boat? Another story from this period of the rowing team from the 1936 Olympics who went to Germany. Okay, so he goes in and he gets the Rhineland. Now, on March 12th, 1938 to March 13th, 1938, he wages a war against Austria. It was one day, and it wasn't much of a war. It was called the Anschluss. It was the annexation of Austria. He wanted to go back and get Austrian land that was separated prior to this, right? And so, rather than a war, what you see is a parade with a lot of people who were waving the swastika flags, welcoming Germany in, because many of them, I'm not saying all of them, but many of them looked at themselves as kindred blood to the Germans. They had been separated because of war, because of treaties, but they consider themselves of like mind, like heart, and like blood. And so they go into the Rhineland, he goes into Austria, and he starts enacting the same anti-Jewish restrictions that have been taking place in Germany. Now, if you remember what we said, the two aims, I want more land and I want more desirable people, less undesirable people. But that constant conflict that's going to happen is the more land you take, the more undesirable people you have. So the more you spread, the more people you're going to inherit. The problem just keeps getting bigger and bigger. All he wanted at first was some people to leave Germany, maybe go to the next country over. But then if you go to the next country over, now you have all of them plus some. And so the world starts to recognize this. And this is important for us to understand. We ask ourselves, did the world know anything? To some extent, this is before mass incarcerations. This is before mass murders. But there was already what would be called the Jewish refugee crisis. German wanted an empire that was Judenrein, or Judenfrei, cleansed of Jews. By 1938, 1/4 of German Jews had already fled the country, about 150,000 in plain sight of the world. Where do they go? Who takes them in? With the annexation of Austria, an additional 185,000 Jews come under German occupation. So 150 left within 5 years, 150,000. Now, within a day, he has 185,000 more. The Germans' Lebensraum, or more living room, of occupying great amounts of land for the purpose of the German Empire created a problem for Germany's hope of that Jew-free empire. More land meant more Jews, which magnified the Jewish question. The rest of the world was forced to recognize and make hard decisions, which they gathered to do in Evian, France. July 6th to the 15th in 1938, 32 countries, delegates from 32 countries, as well as relief organizations meet to discuss the German Jewish refugee crisis. Did people know? Yes. Did countries know something was happening? Yes. Did they know people were trying to flee? That people were trying to get out? Or forced to get out? Yes. Here's a newspaper clipping from New Orleans. Racial refugees find no haven. Floodgates of idealism, but borders remain closed. Now, it doesn't necessarily look, I can't tell that it's on the front page, but it's in an American newspaper in 1938, before World War II even starts. Most countries cited reasons of employment concerns, economic risks, social burden as reasons for not allowing more Jews to immigrate to their country. With the exception of the Dominican Republic, countries were not willing to increase their immigration policies and allow more refugees to enter. The Dominican Republic, of the 32, everyone else had reasons not to. On August 17th, 1938, there was the law on alteration of family and personal names. All Jewish men had to insert the name Israel into their name onto their passport. Didn't matter what your name was. You had to insert the name Israel into your name, and if you were a Jewish woman, you had to insert Sarah into their name. All Jews had to carry identification cards on them, and on the request of some countries, not even just German mandate, on the request of some countries, all Jewish passports were to be stamped with the letter J to identify them as Jews. The purpose of these measures was to officially, legally identify and segregate the Jews from the rest of the population. So now you just ask for papers. Let me see your papers. Doesn't matter if they look the same, act the same, dress the same. Let me see your papers. September 29th to 30th, 1938, the Munich Agreement. Hitler wants what was called the Sudeten region, a German majority population within Czechoslovakia, to be surrendered to Germany. He's already taken back the Rhineland, he's taken back Austria, now he wants Czechoslovakia. The Allies come together to discuss it. And if you know of this kind of speech by Neville Chamberlain, he has this sit down and he has this negotiation, let's call it, between himself and Hitler. And the conclusion was to let Hitler have it. And he believed, the big quote was, "We'll have peace, peace for our time." Now it's done. Just give him that last bit. Clearly he won't ask for more. He's not going to take anything else. Maybe we're too harsh on him. Whatever the cause might be, we'll have peace, peace for all time. If we have an international conference that says there's a Jewish refugee crisis, and 32 countries go to it, and none but one say that we'll increase our immigration policies to allow more people in, what message is that sending to Hitler? No one else wants them either. You had your opportunity. You all met together. You all went to France. And no one else wants them? Maybe this isn't just my problem. Maybe this isn't just a German resolution to this Jewish question. Maybe we're not so wrong after all. No one else wants them either. And now the Allies are telling them for the third time, okay, all right, but now stop it. Now don't take any other land. I can't prove this historically, but I would imagine what Hitler is hearing from all this is green light, green light, green light. No pushback, little to no pushback, maybe a slap on the hand, but we're still going to give you the land that you wanted. And no one else is taking the people that you don't want. This was September 29th to 30th, 1938. Less than 2 months later, we have what's called Kristallnacht. How many of you have heard of Kristallnacht? The night of broken glass, the night of crystal glass. In between, on October 28th, 1938, around 17,000 Polish Jews were expelled from Germany and forced across the German-Poland border. But Poland refused to allow the Jews to enter, so most of the Jews were stranded in between. Among the deportees were the parents of a 17-year-old named Herschel Greenspan, a Polish Jew living in Paris. On November 7th, 1938, Herschel shoots a man named Ernst von Rath, a German diplomat in Paris. Maybe angry about his parents' situation, fed up with the anti-Jewish legislations, saw an opportunity to act aggressively. He shoots a diplomat who is in Paris representing Germany out of supposedly despair for the treatment of his parents. That was all that the Nazis needed. The Nazis claimed that Greenspan was not acting on his own, but rather he was one of many involved in a wider Jewish conspiracy to take over Germany. Does that sound familiar to anything from our week 2? These large-scale conspiracies of takeover, no individual acts, it's all planned, everyone is in on it. Von Rath dies 2 days later. And so on November 9th, 1938, Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels gives a powerful anti-Semitic speech to Nazi faithful gathered in Munich for the anniversary of that 1923 failed beer hall putsch. The thing that never made it out of Munich, they're having an annual celebration for it. Orders were given to the SA and other party groups for that night to attack Jews, destroy Jewish homes, destroy and loot Jewish businesses, and destroy Jewish synagogues, many of which were burned. For that 1 to 2 nights, raids and riots take place. And the name Kristallnacht means the night of broken glass. The following mornings, that's what they found throughout the streets. Broken glass of businesses, homes, synagogues. Several dozen Jews died, and roughly 30,000 were arrested. Who had to pay for it? The Jews. This map gives a rough estimate, not even completely to scale. Every single black dot is a place where a synagogue was destroyed. Simply within those 2 nights. Kristallnacht changes everything. This was going now from anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish legislation, laws. It was going from just squeeze them out by making it so unbearable for them to live here, and that first initial anti-Jewish boycott of Jewish-owned businesses, to now it being acceptable for mass violent acts of aggression, destruction of property. This picture is Jewish men that were arrested and paraded through the streets on their way to a concentration camp. Before being arrested, men are forced to, in certain cases, not everyone, but in certain cases, were forced to recite passages from Mein Kampf from the pulpit of their synagogues before the synagogues were destroyed. The Jewish community was then fined 1 billion Reichmark, $400 million in 1938. In the weeks following Kristallnacht, more and more anti-Jewish legislation was produced, and the concept of a Judenrein, or free of Jew German Reich, became more of a focus. It was now okay to oppress, persecute, and remove by any means necessary Jews from society. This is a commonly used picture. If you've taught the Holocaust or Nazi Germany, you've seen this picture before. But what's interesting as you're looking at this is that you're looking at an entire group. I mean, it goes further back than we can even see in this picture. Rows of Jewish men who were arrested and being taken out. But then the ones who are standing on the side, the ones who are watching it, maybe sitting up on a hill, a boy running alongside, parents holding their smaller children. It's one of those self-reflection pictures of asking ourselves, I wonder, what are they thinking? What's in their head? What are they believing? What are they feeling as they're seeing this parade of people go by? Can't answer that question. We can try to process, but the purpose is not to put ourselves necessarily in their shoes, but it's an observation. What started with 2 laws, the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act, now made nearly everything that's happened up to this point legal, leading to the outward acceptable oppression, persecution, and violence against the Jewish people. And this will be our turning point towards World War II and the events that happen in camps, ghettos, and killing centers. All right, take a few minutes, discuss amongst yourselves what stood out to you from tonight. What was new information? What are you processing? Or maybe go back to that first question that we asked. What makes something right or wrong in our societies?